I was 3 days away from losing my apartment when a lawyer called me and said a man I met exactly once in my life had left me everything. Not a little something. Everything. His house. His accounts. His company's shares. $14 million. And I want to tell you right now, before you assume this is some kind of feel-good fairy tale, it wasn't. It broke me before it fixed me. People I loved turned on me. Strangers threatened me. And for a while, I actually wished he'd never done it. So stay with me, because this story isn't about luck. It's about what money does to the people around you when you suddenly have it, and what it doesn't fix. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what happened to me. Let's go back to the beginning. 2 years ago, I was working 2 jobs just to keep my lights on. I want you to really picture this, because I think a lot of you watching are living some version of it right now. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., go work a shift at a coffee shop, then drive 40 minutes to my second job stocking shelves at a hardware store until almost midnight. I'd come home, eat cold leftovers standing over the sink, and fall asleep in my clothes. I was 29 years old. I had a car that made a sound like it was dying every time I turned it on. I had about $400 in savings, and that number never really moved. It just went up a little, then something broke, the car, my phone, a dentist bill, and it went right back down. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I need you to understand who I was before any of this happened. Because that person, tired, broke, invisible, that's who this billionaire met. His name was Walter. He was 78 years old, and he used to come into the coffee shop every single morning at exactly 6:15. Same order. Black coffee, no sugar, and a plain bagel, dry. For almost a year, I made that man's coffee probably 300 times. And for most of that year, we barely spoke. Just good morning and have a good one. He didn't look rich. That's the first thing I need you to know. He wore the same faded green jacket. Old sneakers. He drove, get this, a 20-year-old pickup truck that looked worse than mine. I had no idea. Nobody did. One morning, everything changed, but not in the way you'd think. Not yet. It was raining hard, one of those mornings where the whole world feels heavy. Walter came in like always, but this time, he sat down at the little table by the window instead of leaving right away. I noticed his hands were shaking. Just a little. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. I brought him his coffee, and before I could walk away, he said, "Do you have a minute?" I almost said no. I had dishes piling up, a manager watching the clock, and honestly, I just didn't have the emotional energy that day. But something in his voice stopped me. I sat down for 5 minutes. Just 5. He asked me about my life. Not small talk, real questions. What did I want to do with my life? Did I have family? Was I happy? I remember laughing a little, because no one had asked me if I was happy in a long time. I told him the truth. I said I was tired. I said I felt like I was working just to survive, not live. I told him about my mom, who was sick, and how I couldn't afford to help her the way I wanted to. I told him I used to want to go back to school, but that dream felt like it belonged to someone else now. He just listened. He didn't say much. When he got up to leave, he said something I've never forgotten. He said, "You remind me of someone I used to know." Then he left a tip on the table. It was $1. I remember being a little annoyed, honestly, $1, after that whole conversation. But I didn't think about it again. 2 weeks later, he stopped coming in. At first, I figured he found a new coffee shop, or maybe he was on vacation. But after a month passed, I started to worry. I asked one of the regulars if they knew him. Nobody did. He was just gone. I want to be honest with you, life kept moving. I had my own problems. My car finally died for real, and I had to take 3 buses to get to my second job. My mom's condition got worse, and the guilt of not being able to do more for her sat on my chest every single day like a rock. I stopped thinking about the old man in the green jacket. Then, about 5 months later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the phone was calm, professional. He said his name was Richard, and he was an attorney representing the estate of a man named Walter A.M. I'm not going to say his last name, for reasons I'll explain later. But let's just say, when Richard said it, my stomach dropped. Because that last name? It was on buildings. It was on a company that basically every person in this country has used at some point. It was one of those names you see on the news, attached to numbers with way too many zeros. I actually laughed. I thought it was a scam. I told him, "I think you have the wrong person." He said, "Are you the person who worked at the coffee shop on 5th and Main? Did you serve a man named Walter black coffee and a dry bagel most mornings?" My hands started shaking. He told me Walter had passed away. Heart failure in his sleep, at his home. And he told me that in Walter's will, updated just 6 weeks before his death, my name was listed. Not as a small gift. Not as a, "Thank you for your service." As the primary beneficiary of his estate. I remember sitting on the floor of my apartment, phone pressed to my ear, and I couldn't say anything. I just kept saying, "What?" over and over, like my brain refused to process the sentence. Richard had to repeat it 3 times before it started to sink in. Walter A.M. had no children. His wife had passed away 9 years earlier. He had a brother he hadn't spoken to in over 2 decades, and a handful of nieces and nephews he barely knew. And apparently, in his final months, he had been quietly rewriting his will. He left almost everything to me. $14 million, give or take, once everything settled, his house, investment accounts, and a chunk of shares in the company that carried his family name. You'd think this is where the story turns into a fairy tale, right? Poor girl gets rescued. Credits roll. I wish it were that simple. The first thing that happened, before I even saw a single dollar, was the lawsuits. Walter's family, the brother, the nieces, the nephews, people who hadn't called him in years, they came out of nowhere. Lawyers started sending letters. They claimed I had manipulated a lonely old man. They claimed I targeted him at the coffee shop, that I preyed on his loneliness. One article, because yes, it made the news, actually called me a gold-digging barista. And that phrase followed me everywhere for months. I remember reading that article at 2 a.m., crying so hard I couldn't breathe, because none of it was true. I didn't even know his last name until the lawyer called me. I had no idea who he was. I served him coffee. I talked to him for 5 minutes one rainy morning. That's it. But nobody wanted to hear that. They wanted a villain, and I fit the story perfectly. Here's something nobody tells you about sudden money. It doesn't just change your bank account. It changes how people look at you. Overnight. Old friends I hadn't heard from in years started texting me. Some were sweet, just checking in. Others were not. One friend from high school messaged me asking for $11,000 for a business opportunity, less than 48 hours after the news broke. A cousin I hadn't spoken to since a family wedding 6 years earlier called crying, saying she always knew I'd do something great, and could I help with her rent. And the worst part? My mom. My sick mom, the reason I'd wanted this kind of help for years, she got dragged into it too. Reporters called her. Someone showed up at her apartment building asking questions. She was scared. She didn't understand why strangers suddenly cared about her daughter. I remember calling her, crying, saying, I'm so sorry, I didn't ask for this. And she said something I'll never forget. She said, "Baby, having something people want doesn't make you responsible for their feelings about it." I held on to that sentence for months. The legal battle dragged on. Almost a year. There were depositions. I had to sit in a room with lawyers I'd never met and explain, over and over, every single detail of a 5-minute conversation I had with a stranger in a coffee shop. I had to prove I wasn't lying. I had to prove I wasn't a manipulator. I had to defend my own character to people who had already decided who I was. There were nights I genuinely thought about giving the money back. Just to make it stop. Just to go back to being invisible, tired, broke, but at least unbothered. I remember calling Richard, the lawyer, late one night, and telling him I couldn't do this anymore. And he said something that shifted everything for me. He said, "Walter didn't leave you this because he felt sorry for you. He left it to you because, in his last year of life, you were the only person who made him feel like a person, not a name on a building." I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't fully. During the legal process, I learned more about who Walter actually was. And honestly, it made everything hurt more, in a good way. He built his company from nothing, back when he was younger than I am now. He worked 18-hour days for over a decade. He said in an old interview, one Richard showed me, that success cost him everything that mattered. His relationship with his brother, time with his wife before she passed, and most of his real friendships. By the time he was in his 70s, he was one of those men who had every material thing and almost nobody to share it with. His house had 6 bedrooms and he used one. He ate most of his meals alone. His circle, if you could call it that, was made up of employees, lawyers, and people who wanted something from him. That's why the coffee shop mattered to him. Nobody there knew who he was. For 15 minutes every morning he wasn't Mr. AM, the man on the letterhead. He was just a guy getting his coffee. And I think, in his own way, our 5-minute conversation on that rainy morning reminded him of something he'd lost a long time ago. Someone actually listening. Someone not wanting anything from him. That's what he told his lawyer, actually, when he changed the will. Richard read me a line from Walter's private notes, and I still think about it almost every day. He wrote, "She didn't know who I was, and she was kind to me anyway. That's rare enough to change a life for." I broke down when I heard that. Because the truth is, I wasn't being kind to get something. I was just being a person. I think that's the whole point of this story, honestly. The version of me that got everything is the exact same version of me that had nothing. I didn't change to earn this. I was just me. Eventually, after almost a year of legal fighting, the case settled. The family got a portion. Honestly, I agreed to that myself, even though I didn't have to, because I didn't want to spend my whole life in a courtroom fighting people over a dead man's money. I kept the majority of the estate. But here's the thing I want you to really understand. The money isn't actually the part of this story that changed me the most. What changed me was watching how people reacted to money. It taught me more about human nature in 1 year than I'd learned in my entire life before that. I learned that some people will love you conditionally, and you won't find out until the conditions change. I learned that the people who stuck around, the ones who didn't ask for anything, who still just texted, "How are you doing, really?" Those are the ones worth keeping close for life. I paid off my mom's medical debt. That was the very first thing I did, before I bought anything for myself. I moved her somewhere safer, somewhere with actual care nearby. I still remember her face when I told her she never had to worry about a hospital bill again. I don't think I'll ever have a moment that beats that one. I quietly started a scholarship fund, small, not flashy, no press, for kids working full-time jobs while trying to get through community college. Kids like the version of me that used to dream about school between double shifts. I didn't do it for attention. I did it because I know what it feels like to want something so badly and not have the money to reach for it. I went back to school myself, actually. Something I thought I'd given up on forever. And I still, to this day, go back to that same coffee shop sometimes. I sit at the little table by the window. The one Walter used to sit at. People online love to say money doesn't buy happiness, and I used to roll my eyes at that, honestly, because when you're broke, that phrase feels like something only rich people get to say. But now that I've lived both lives, the one where I counted every dollar, and the one where I technically don't have to anymore, I understand it a little differently. Money didn't buy me happiness. But it bought my mom time, and comfort, and dignity. It bought me the freedom to stop surviving and start actually thinking about who I want to be. That's not nothing. That matters. But it also showed me, in the harshest way possible, exactly who was in my life for the right reasons, and who wasn't. And honestly, that part hurt more than being broke ever did. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this: be kind to people even when you have nothing to gain from it. You genuinely never know whose life you're stepping into, even for 5 minutes. Walter wasn't looking for an heir that morning. I wasn't looking for anything either. We were just two tired people, being decent to each other, for no reason at all. That's it. That's the whole secret. And to anyone watching this who's exactly where I was, working yourself to exhaustion, wondering if anything is ever going to change, I'm not saying a stranger is going to leave you a fortune. That's not the point, and honestly, that almost destroyed me before it helped me. What I am saying is this: don't let the hard years make you hard. Keep being someone who shows up, who listens, who treats people like people. Not because you're waiting for a reward, but because it's who you actually are underneath all that exhaustion. That's what mattered to Walter in the end. Not money. Not his name on a building. Just one honest conversation with someone who didn't want anything from him. If this story moved you even a little, let me know in the comments. I actually read every single one. Tell me, honestly, if you were in my shoes, do you think you'd have done anything differently? And if you want more real, raw stories like this one, hit subscribe, because trust me, this isn't the only life that got completely turned upside down in the most unexpected way. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you in the next story.